An American athlete's nightmare in Manila City Jail. Good day, everyone. Today, I want to share a harrowing tale that serves as a cautionary reminder of the dangers of the unknown. Imagine being a rising athlete, traveling the world to compete, only to find yourself trapped in one of the most dangerous prisons in the world, Manila City Jail. This is the story of an American athlete who experienced firsthand the horrors of the Philippine prison system. Known for its extreme overcrowding, inhumane conditions, and a justice system that often leaves foreigners feeling helpless, Manila City Jail is a place no one wants to end up. The athlete, whose dreams were once filled with medals and championships, now faced brutal realities. Filthy cells crammed with inmates, scarce food and water, and a constant fear of violence. Corruption made matters worse. Bribes were often the only way to survive, and legal assistance was slow and difficult to obtain. How did this happen? A misunderstanding, a false accusation, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Many foreigners, like this athlete, find themselves caught in a system where justice is not always swift or fair. This story serves as a warning to all travelers. Be cautious, know the laws, and understand the risks of being in unfamiliar territory. While the Philippines is a beautiful country with rich culture and warm people, its justice system and prison conditions can be unforgiving, even to the innocent. Let this serve as a lesson. Always be aware of your surroundings, respect local laws, and never take safety for granted. Because for this American athlete, a moment of misfortune turned into a living nightmare. Introduction to the athlete's nightmare. Imagine a young, talented athlete from the United States, someone who has spent years training, pushing their body to the limits, and competing on the international stage. With dreams of greatness, they travel to different countries, experiencing new cultures, meeting new people, and representing their homeland with pride. The Philippines was supposed to be just another stop on their journey, perhaps for a competition, a training camp, or even a short vacation. But instead of medals and applause, they found themselves in the most horrifying and unexpected situation of their life. Locked inside Manila City Jail, a place notorious for its extreme overcrowding, violence, and lack of basic human rights. At first, it was a blur, a simple mistake, a misunderstanding, or maybe even a setup. One moment, they were enjoying their time in the bustling city of Manila, and the next, they were surrounded by police officers, handcuffed, and taken into custody. The language barrier made things worse. The athlete didn't fully understand what was happening. Were they being accused of a crime they didn't commit? Had they unknowingly broken a law? Every question they asked was met with silence or vague responses. Their legal rights were unclear, and panic started to set in. Being in a foreign country, far from home, with no immediate access to legal help, the situation quickly turned into a nightmare. The athlete was taken to the police station, where they were interrogated under immense pressure. There was no clear explanation of the charges, no phone call home, and no immediate access to a lawyer who could properly defend them. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Then came the worst part, the realization that they were not just being held temporarily, but were about to be transferred to Manila City Jail, one of the most feared detention centers in the world. Manila City Jail is not like the prisons in America, where there are systems in place to maintain some order and basic human dignity. Instead, it is an overcrowded, chaotic, and dangerous environment where survival depends not just on physical strength, but also on navigating the unspoken rules of the inmates, the guards, and the corrupt system that thrives inside. The athlete, who had spent years training to compete on the field, now faced a completely different kind of competition. The fight to stay alive in a place where only the strongest, or the most well-connected, had any chance of making it through. From that moment on, their life changed forever. The dream of winning championships was replaced by a desperate struggle for survival. The roar of the crowd was replaced by the screams of suffering prisoners. The structured discipline of sports was replaced by the lawless chaos of one of the world's most notorious prisons. What was supposed to be a temporary trip to a foreign country had turned into a never-ending nightmare, and every passing second inside Manila City Jail was a reminder that freedom was slipping further and further away. The horrors of Manila City Jail. Stepping into Manila City Jail for the first time is like entering a different world, one filled with fear, chaos, and unbearable suffering. For the American athlete, the moment the heavy iron gates closed behind them, reality hit harder than any physical challenge they had ever faced. The sounds of shouting, the stench of sweat and decay, and the oppressive heat of the overcrowded prison cells made it clear. This was not just a holding facility. This was a nightmare that thousands of inmates lived every single day. The first thing that stood out was the sheer number of prisoners packed into every available space. Manila City Jail was originally built to house a few thousand inmates, but now, reports suggest that it holds several times that number. Cells meant for 20 people often contain over 100. There is no room to move, no personal space, and barely any place to sleep. Prisoners are crammed together, some forced to sleep standing up, others lying on the hard concrete floor, and many taking turns just to stretch their legs. The unbearable heat, combined with the body heat of so many inmates, turns the jail into a suffocating oven where fresh air is a luxury. The filth is everywhere. There are no proper sanitation facilities, and the stench of urine, sweat, and rotting food lingers in the air. The few toilets available are broken or overflowing, forcing prisoners to relieve themselves in plastic bags or makeshift containers. Showers are rare, and clean water is almost impossible to come by. For a professional athlete, someone used to maintaining peak physical condition, this level of filth was beyond comprehension. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a serious health risk. Skin infections, diseases, and malnutrition were rampant. Those who fell sick rarely received medical treatment. Instead, they were left to suffer, and in many cases, die from easily treatable illnesses. Then there was the violence. Manila City Jail is not just a place of suffering. It is a battlefield where the strong dominate the weak. Gangs control every aspect of life inside, from food distribution to sleeping arrangements. Bribery and connections determine whether an inmate will receive any level of protection or if they will be left to fend for themselves against violent attacks. The athlete quickly realized that without allies, they were vulnerable. The guards, instead of providing order, often turned a blind eye to the brutality or participated in it themselves. Weapons were common, despite strict prison rules. Inmates crafted makeshift knives from sharpened scraps of metal or broken glass, and fights broke out without warning. A simple argument over food, space, or even a glance in the wrong direction could turn deadly. The athlete, once used to competing in arenas where sportsmanship and fairness ruled, was now in an environment where only brute force and intimidation mattered. Food was another battle. Meals consisted of small portions of rice and watery soup, barely enough to keep someone alive, let alone nourish an athlete's body. If you wanted more, you had to pay, either with money, favors, or through dangerous alliances with gangs. The athlete, who was used to carefully managing their diet for peak performance, now had to fight just to get enough calories to survive. And then there was the psychological torment. Being surrounded by suffering, seeing fellow inmates beaten or broken by the system, and realizing that there was no immediate escape. It all took a toll. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, with no sense of when or if freedom would ever come. Every night was spent in fear of what the next day would bring. Manila City Jail was not just a place of confinement. It was a place that crushed spirits, broke bodies, and left even the strongest questioning whether they would ever make it out alive. For an American athlete who once believed in discipline, training, and perseverance, this was a challenge unlike any other, a challenge they never expected and one they weren't sure they could survive. The harsh reality for foreigners. For a foreigner, especially an American, being imprisoned in Manila City Jail is a uniquely terrifying experience. Unlike local prisoners, who might have family connections, street smarts, or an understanding of the unspoken rules of survival, foreigners enter the system as complete outsiders. They don't know the language, the customs, or the hidden dangers lurking in every corner. From the moment they step inside, They are seen as easy targets, vulnerable, isolated, and in the eyes of some inmates and even guards, a potential source of money. The American athlete quickly realized that the prison system in the Philippines does not operate the way they were accustomed to back home. In the U.S., prisoners have certain rights, access to lawyers, and a system that, while flawed, still provides some level of due process. In Manila City Jail, none of that could be taken for granted. Corruption was rampant, and justice moved at a painfully slow pace. If you had money or influence, you might be able to improve your conditions. If you didn't, you were at the mercy of a system that often forgot about you. Bribery was a way of life inside the jail. Every basic need, food, water, a safer place to sleep, came with a price. If you wanted to avoid being placed in the worst, most overcrowded cells, you had to pay off the right people. If you wanted a slightly larger portion of food, you had to grease the hands of the kitchen workers. Even getting access to medical care required a bribe, and if you couldn't afford it, you were left to suffer. For a foreigner unfamiliar with this system, adjusting to this brutal reality was not just difficult, it was dangerous. Communication was another major hurdle. Most of the guards and inmates spoke Tagalog, and while some understood English, that didn't mean they were willing to help. The athlete quickly learned that being unable to speak the language made them even more of an outsider. They couldn't defend themselves in arguments, negotiate with inmates, or even understand the orders given by guards. This led to frustration, misunderstandings, and, in some cases, violent confrontations simply because they didn't know what was being said. The legal system was just as unforgiving. Trials in the Philippines can take years, and the process is often delayed by bureaucracy, corruption, and inefficiency. Many foreigners who find themselves locked up in Manila City Jail are told they will be released soon, only to wait months or even years for their case to be processed. The athlete, who had once lived by a strict schedule of training, competing, and setting goals, now found themselves trapped in a system where time had no meaning. Meanwhile, their identity as an American made them both a curiosity and a target. Some inmates viewed them with respect, assuming that as a foreigner, they must have money and connections. Others saw them as weak, an easy mark for extortion or violence. The guards, too, were unpredictable. Some treated them with indifference, while others saw an opportunity to demand bribes in exchange for small favors, maybe a phone call, a slightly cleaner corner of the cell, or protection from the more violent gangs. Back home, their family and friends might have been trying to help, reaching out to embassies and legal representatives. But inside the jail, none of that mattered. They were alone, stuck in a system that operated on its own rules, where money and power dictated everything. Their status as a professional athlete, someone who had once been admired and celebrated, meant nothing in this world. Here, they were just another prisoner, struggling to survive. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the athletes started to understand the brutal reality that many foreigners face when they get caught in the Philippine prison system. There was no quick way out, no guarantee of justice, and no certainty that they would ever set foot outside those prison walls again. How did it happen? The American athlete never imagined that a trip to the Philippines would lead to their worst nightmare, being locked up in one of the most overcrowded and dangerous prisons in the world. But how did it happen? How does someone who spent their life focused on sports, discipline, and success suddenly find themselves behind bars in a foreign country? The answer, as with many cases of foreigners ending up in Manila City Jail, is a combination of bad luck, misunderstandings, and a justice system that is often unforgiving, especially to outsiders. It could have started with something as simple as being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps the athlete was out with friends, celebrating after a competition, when an argument broke out at a bar or a nightclub. In many cases, foreign tourists find themselves caught in altercations they had no intention of being part of. Maybe the athlete tried to break up a fight, only to be mistaken for an aggressor. Or perhaps they were falsely accused of a crime they didn't commit, something as minor as public disturbance or as serious as drug possession. In the Philippines, accusations alone can be enough to land someone in jail, even before any real evidence is presented. Another common scenario for foreigners in the Philippines is entrapment. Corrupt police officers or criminals working with authorities sometimes target foreigners, knowing that they're vulnerable and less familiar with the local laws. The athlete may have been set up. Perhaps someone planted illegal substances in their belongings, or they were tricked into handling something that was later used as evidence against them. In some cases, police raids on clubs or hotels lead to mass arrests, where innocent people are detained simply for being in the wrong crowd. There's also the possibility of a visa or paperwork issue. Many foreigners traveling to the Philippines don't realize how strict immigration laws can be. A missed renewal date on a visa, an expired work permit, or an administrative mistake can result in immediate detention. The athlete, focused on their training and career, may not have been aware of a small paperwork error that led to their arrest. And in a system where legal proceedings move slowly, even a minor immigration issue can mean months in jail before it's resolved. Then there's the factor of mistaken identity. In a country where crime rates can be high and law enforcement is under pressure to produce results, cases of mistaken identity are not uncommon. A witness may have wrongly identified the athlete as someone involved in a crime. Or perhaps they simply fit the description of a suspect, a tall, muscular foreigner with noticeable features. Once an arrest is made, proving innocence becomes a long and exhausting battle, especially for someone unfamiliar with the legal system. Regardless of how it happened, once the athlete was in custody, the situation spiraled out of control. They likely thought it was a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly. But in Manila, once you enter the system, getting out is not so simple. The moment they were taken to the police station, the real nightmare began. They were interrogated, possibly without legal representation, and pressured into signing documents they didn't fully understand. Their protests of innocence were met with indifference. The legal process moved slowly, and before they knew it, they were transferred to Manila City Jail, where they would wait days, weeks, even months, before their case was even reviewed. By the time they realized how serious the situation was, it was already too late. They were just another foreigner lost in the brutal Philippine prison system, desperately hoping for a way out. Survival inside the jail. From the moment the American athlete stepped into Manila City Jail, survival became their only priority. Gone were the days of training, competing, and chasing victory. Now, every waking moment was spent navigating the harsh realities of prison life, figuring out how to stay safe, where to sleep, what to eat, and who to trust. The rules of sportsmanship and fair play no longer applied. This was an entirely different kind of competition, one where losing could mean injury, starvation, or even death. The first challenge was finding a place to sleep. Manila City Jail is notorious for its extreme overcrowding, with cells designed for a few dozen prisoners, often holding hundreds. There were no beds, no mats, and barely enough room to sit. Inmates were stacked on top of each other, some sleeping in shifts, others forced to stand for hours just to make space. The athlete, used to resting in comfortable accommodations before big games, now found themselves struggling just to find a small corner to rest. Without money or connections, they had no choice but to accept whatever space was given to them, often near the bathroom, where the stench of urine and sewage filled the air. Next came food and water, both of which were scarce. Prison meals consisted of a small portion of rice and watery soup, sometimes with bits of meat or vegetables, but never enough to sustain an active body. Dehydration was a constant threat, as clean drinking water was a luxury. If an inmate wanted more food or better water, they had to pay. But the athlete, unfamiliar with the jail's economy, quickly realized that nothing came for free. Every favor had a cost, and accepting help from the wrong people could lead to dangerous debts. Then there was the violence. Manila City Jail is controlled by gangs, and every new prisoner is watched closely. Some inmates are forced to prove their toughness through fights, while others are tested in different ways. The athlete, strong and physically fit, was seen as both a threat and a potential asset. Some inmates wanted to challenge them, eager to establish dominance, while others wanted to recruit them for protection. The athlete had to tread carefully, Getting into a fight could mean serious injuries or even death, but refusing to fight could be seen as weakness, making them an easy target. Bribery and corruption played a major role in survival. The guards, rather than enforcing order, often turned a blind eye to abuse and violence, unless they were paid to intervene. Some guards ran extortion schemes, demanding money from prisoners in exchange for basic necessities. If the athlete had any money left, it would disappear quickly, either taken by corrupt officials or used to buy favors from inmates who controlled the food supply, sleeping spaces, or protection services. Hygiene was another struggle. With thousands of prisoners crammed into a facility with limited access to water and soap, infections and diseases spread rapidly. Skin conditions, tuberculosis, and other illnesses were common. The athlete, once disciplined about maintaining their health and fitness, now had to deal with the reality of living in filth, unable to properly clean themselves or even change clothes regularly. But perhaps the hardest part of survival was the mental toll. Manila City Jail was not just a physical challenge. It was psychological warfare. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, with no clear indication of when or if freedom would come. Every day was filled with uncertainty, fear, and the knowledge that one wrong move could have deadly consequences. For an athlete accustomed to structured training, goal setting, and discipline, the randomness and chaos of prison life were unbearable. There was no routine, no schedule, no sense of progress, just an endless cycle of survival. In this brutal environment, the athlete had to learn quickly. They had to figure out who to trust, how to communicate without speaking the local language, and how to avoid the dangers that lurked around every corner. It was no longer about winning medals or breaking records. It was about staying alive in one of the most unforgiving places on earth. A warning to travelers. The story of the American athlete trapped in Manila City Jail is not just a personal tragedy. It is a warning to every traveler who steps foot into a foreign country without fully understanding the risks. Many tourists and expatriates assume that because they come from a developed nation, they are protected by their embassy, their passport, or international laws. But the truth is far harsher. Once you enter a foreign legal system, you are bound by its rules. And if you make a mistake, or worse, if you are falsely accused, there may be little that anyone can do to save you. One of the biggest mistakes that many foreigners make is underestimating the severity of the legal system in countries like the Philippines. While the country is known for its beautiful beaches, rich culture, and warm hospitality, its justice system is notoriously slow, inefficient, and often corrupt. Laws are strictly enforced, and even minor infractions can lead to serious consequences. Something as simple as overstaying a visa, getting into a heated argument, or unknowingly associating with the wrong people can land a person in jail. Once inside, the process of proving innocence is long and grueling, often taking years before any real progress is made. Another critical mistake is not understanding how easy it is to become a target. Foreigners, especially Americans, Europeans, and other Westerners, are often viewed as wealthy, even if they are not. Criminals, corrupt police officers, and even ordinary people looking for a quick payday can take advantage of this perception. Scenarios such as entrapment, false accusations, or even random arrests are not uncommon. A traveler could be approached by a stranger offering drugs, and if they decline, that very same stranger could tip off the police and have them arrested for suspicion. Once in custody, the police may demand bribes to fix the situation, and those who refuse may find themselves stuck in jail, awaiting a trial that could take years to begin. Bribery is an open secret in many parts of the world, and the Philippines is no exception. Many foreigners assume that justice is based on truth, evidence, and fairness, but in reality, money and influence often determine the outcome of a case. If a foreigner is arrested and cannot afford to pay off the right people, they may be left to rot in a cell while their case drags on indefinitely. The American athlete, likely unfamiliar with the workings of the system, may have initially believed that justice would prevail, only to realize too late that without financial resources, their chances of getting a fair trial were slim to none. Another danger that travelers overlook is the unpredictability of local enforcement. Laws may be written one way, but enforced in another. What might seem like a minor infraction in one country could be a major crime in another. For example, in the Philippines, public intoxication, possession of certain medications without proper documentation, or even being in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time can result in arrest. Many travelers do not take the time to learn the specific laws of the country they are visiting, assuming that as long as they behave well, they will be fine. The American athlete likely made the same mistake, assuming that because they were not a criminal, they had nothing to worry about. One of the most devastating aspects of being arrested in a foreign country is the lack of immediate legal assistance. Unlike in the United States, where everyone has the right to a lawyer and a fair trial, foreigners in the Philippines often struggle to get proper legal representation. Public defenders are overworked and underpaid, and embassies have limited power to intervene in local legal matters. Even if a traveler's home country tries to provide assistance, the reality is that they cannot override the local justice system. This means that once arrested, a foreigner is at the mercy of a system they do not understand, surrounded by people who may have no interest in helping them. Perhaps the most tragic part of this warning is that most people never think it will happen to them. No one travels to a new country expecting to be thrown into prison. The American athlete likely believed that their trip would be about training, competing, or simply experiencing a new culture. But one mistake, one wrong place at the wrong time, one unlucky encounter, and everything changed. The same can happen to anyone. This is why awareness and caution are crucial. Travelers must educate themselves about local laws, avoid risky situations, and be mindful of the people they associate with. They must understand that their status as a foreigner does not grant them immunity. In fact, it often makes them more vulnerable. Manila City Jail is filled with stories of people who never expected to be there, people who thought they were careful, people who believed that justice would protect them. But in the end, they learn the hard way that once you enter a foreign prison, escaping its grip is far harder than anyone ever imagines. The long road to freedom. For the American athlete trapped in Manila City Jail, the journey to freedom was a long and torturous process, one that would test every ounce of patience, resilience, and mental fortitude they had ever developed. What began as an ordinary trip turned into an agonizing ordeal, where each day seemed to stretch into an eternity. For many, freedom doesn't come quickly, and for foreigners, especially those without the resources to navigate the corrupt and bureaucratic system, the road to release can seem like an impossible dream. The first challenge was the endless waiting. In Manila City Jail, time becomes a blur. The athlete likely spent days, weeks, or even months locked in a small, overcrowded cell, with no clear understanding of when they might be released. Filipino prisons are notorious for their slow-moving legal processes, with cases delayed by corruption, bureaucracy, and inefficiency. The athlete, once accustomed to setting goals and achieving them with discipline and determination, now found themselves powerless in a system that moved at a snail's pace. With every passing day, their hope for a swift resolution dwindled, replaced by the growing realization that their freedom might not come soon. The lack of clear communication only exacerbated the uncertainty. No one explained what was happening or what steps needed to be taken for the athlete to be freed. They were left in the dark about the specifics of their case, unsure whether they were being charged with a crime or just being detained for an indefinite period. Communication with family or legal representatives back home was difficult, as access to phones or internet was limited, and a language barrier made it nearly impossible to get clear answers from the prison staff. Without any understanding of the legal proceedings or how long they would last, the athlete could only wait and wait some more. The mental toll of being trapped in such a foreign and harsh environment was immense. It is said that the hardest part of being in prison is not the physical confinement, but the psychological strain of being isolated from the outside world. For the athlete, this meant hours spent alone in a tiny cell, surrounded by strangers who spoke a different language, with no way to communicate effectively. The uncertainty of their future, combined with the brutal conditions of a jail, caused immense anxiety and stress. Every day felt like a countdown, with the athlete growing more and more despondent as time passed without any progress in their case. The reality that they might spend months or even years in prison without knowing when or if they would ever be free seemed almost unbearable. But even in such dire circumstances, hope and perseverance were crucial. While the athlete may have felt completely alone, there were others in the same situation, other foreigners, locals, and even some prison staff who understood the struggle. In the depths of despair, it was the small moments of human connection and support that kept the athlete going. Prisoners, despite their harsh surroundings, often formed tight-knit communities. Inmates would share stories of survival, advice, and encouragement. Sometimes, it was these informal networks, people who had navigated the prison system and understood its rules, that provided the guidance necessary for the athlete to know what steps to take next. Meanwhile, back home, the athlete's family and friends were likely fighting to secure their release, contacting embassies, hiring lawyers, and making desperate pleas to anyone who would listen. The athlete's embassy would have been contacted, but foreign embassies can only do so much in these situations. While consular officials could help ensure that the athlete's basic rights were respected, they had limited power in terms of expediting legal matters or influencing the outcome of a trial. The athlete's case, like many others, would have likely slipped through the cracks of a system overloaded with detainees and overwhelmed by inefficiency. But the journey to freedom wasn't just about waiting. It was about taking small steps toward navigating the corrupt and complex legal system. For the athlete, this meant attempting to gather whatever information they could about their case, either through other prisoners, lawyers, or limited access to legal documents. In some cases, inmates might have learned how to expedite their release by paying off the right officials or making the right connections. While this was not a guaranteed path to freedom, it was sometimes the only way out in a system where corruption often overshadowed justice. The athlete also had to learn how to deal with the emotional toll of being isolated from their family, friends, and life as they knew it. In prison, there's a constant longing for something beyond the bars, whether that's the hope of reuniting with loved ones, returning to a normal life, or simply being able to breathe fresh air outside of a cell. For a professional athlete, someone who had once enjoyed fame, admiration, and the thrill of competition, the sudden, cruel shift from being in the spotlight to the complete anonymity of a jail cell was perhaps the most emotionally draining part of the entire ordeal. The athlete likely had moments of intense loneliness, self-doubt, and desperation, wondering if they would ever return to the world they once knew. However, perseverance became key. It was this perseverance, the ability to hold on through the darkest times, that kept the athlete alive, both physically and mentally. Over time, the athlete may have come to realize that while their situation was dire, they still had agency, small as it might have been, to influence their circumstances. By learning the unwritten rules of prison survival, building alliances, and maintaining hope, the athlete inched closer to the elusive goal of freedom. The eventual resolution of the athlete's case, whether through legal intervention, a plea deal, or diplomatic pressure from their home country, would be the culmination of not just a fight for legal justice, but a battle for mental and physical survival. For many who experience such harrowing ordeals, the road to freedom is long, full of setbacks and challenges, and the struggle often does not end even when the physical bars are finally removed. The emotional scars, the psychological toll of confinement, and the trauma of having been in a system that seemed to ignore their humanity may remain long after their release. For the athlete, however, the long road to freedom would signify more than just physical liberation. It would represent the triumph of resilience, a testament to their ability to endure even when the odds were stacked against them. Ultimately, the athlete's release from Manila City Jail would come, whether through legal intervention, diplomatic efforts, or sheer luck. But freedom, though dearly earned, would not return things to normal right away. The trauma of their time behind bars, of surviving the violence, corruption, and uncertainty would take time to heal. For the athlete, The return to their former life would be complicated by the emotional and psychological scars left by the experience. The physical endurance required to survive in jail was nothing compared to the resilience needed to rebuild a life shattered by months, if not years, of torment. This story, however, is not just about one athlete's harrowing experience in a foreign jail. It serves as a stark reminder for all travelers about the risks of stepping into unfamiliar legal systems and the importance of being vigilant, prepared, and aware of local laws and customs. It's a cautionary tale that highlights the need for caution when traveling abroad, especially in countries where legal systems may not align with what we expect at home. For the athlete, the road ahead may be long, but the strength gained through survival, the lessons learned in the darkest moments, and the determination to reclaim their life will serve them in ways that no championship medal ever could. Their ordeal will become part of who they are, a reminder that sometimes the toughest battles aren't fought on the field or in the gym, but in the struggle to survive when everything else is taken away.